r/conspiracy. List of proven conspiracies. Links for more info and proof in the description. Immediately after World War II, researchers at Vanderbilt University gave 829 pregnant mothers in Tennessee what they were told were vitamin drinks that would improve the health of their babies. The mixtures contained radioactive iron, and the researchers were determining how fast the radioisotope crossed into the placenta. At least 3 children are known to have died from the experiments, from cancers and leukemia. Guatemala Syphilis Experiment, American medical research project that lasted from 1946 to 1948 and is known for its unethical experimentation on vulnerable human populations in Guatemala. The Guatemala experiments remained a largely unknown event in US medical history until the early 2000s. The total study population included more than 5,500 Guatemalan prisoners, sex workers, soldiers, children, and psychiatric patients, about 1/4 of whom were deliberately infected with syphilis, gonorrhea, or chancroid, and all of whom were enrolled in the experiments without their consent. Among the most controversial methods used was normal exposure, in which sex workers infected with syphilis were used to transmit the disease to unsuspecting prisoners. Approximately 1,308 soldiers, prisoners, sex workers, and psychiatric patients, ranging from age 10 to 72, were intentionally exposed to STDs during the study. Syphilis exposure occurred through inoculation of the cervix in sex workers, through injection or direct sexual contact with infected sex workers in prisoners, and through injection, inoculation, via abrasion, of the penis, cysternal puncture, the insertion of a needle below the occipital bone at the back of the skull to access cerebrospinal fluid, or oral ingestion in psychiatric patients. Exposure to gonorrhea was carried out in sex workers through cervical inoculation, and in Guatemalan soldiers through sexual contact with the sex workers, and sometimes through urethral inoculation. The deliberate starvation of millions in Ukraine in the spring of 1933, the Soviet Union was in the depths of a class war. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin had sent workers and communists from the cities to extract grain from the countryside. "We realized," as one of them put it, "that it was impossible for us to live on the same earth as these bloodsuckers." The suppression of private agriculture, combined with unreasonable requisitions, caused millions to die that year in the Soviet Union. As the post-Sana Plebom reveals in Red Famine, Stalin and the Soviet leadership enforced policies that ensured that the disaster was worst in Ukraine. According to the latest work of demographers, some 3.9 million people died by starvation in that Soviet republic. Until the Holocaust, the Great Famine in Soviet Ukraine was the largest policy of mass killing in Europe in the 20th century. The CIA monitoring of journalists in 1963, 1971 and 1972, including wiretapping their phones and setting up observation posts across the street from their offices to track their comings and goings and their visitors, was a practice that the White House itself employed during the Nixon administration. Harvey Weinstein's Army of Spies. The film executive hired private investigators, including ex-Mossad agents, to track actresses and journalists. Richard Horton, editor-in-chief of The Lancet, recently wrote, "Much of the scientific literature, perhaps half, may simply be untrue. Afflicted by studies with small sample sizes, tiny effects, invalid exploratory analysis, and flagrant conflicts of interest, together with an obsession for pursuing fashionable trends of dubious importance, science has taken a turn towards darkness." As one participant put it, "Poor methods get results." Roscoe H. Hillenkoetter, who was the first director of the CIA and on the board of governors for NICAP, said in a letter to Congress, "Behind the scenes, high-ranking Air Force officers are soberly concerned about UFOs. But through official secrecy and ridicule, many citizens are led to believe the unknown flying objects are nonsense. To hide the facts, the Air Force has silenced its personnel." Back in the 1960s, a sugar industry executive wrote fact checks to a group of Harvard researchers so that they'd downplay the links between sugar and heart disease in a prominent medical journal, and the researchers did it, according to historical documents reported in the journal JAMA Internal Medicine. One of those Harvard researchers went on to become the head of nutrition at the United States Department of Agriculture, where he set the stage for the federal government's current dietary guidelines. All in all, the corrupted researchers and skewed scientific literature successfully helped draw attention away from the health risks of sweets and shift the blame solely to fats for nearly 5 decades. The low-fat, high-sugar diets that health experts subsequently encouraged are now seen as a main driver of the current obesity epidemic. Over the decades, the relationship between Hollywood and the military has served the needs of both sides. Filmmakers gain access to equipment, locations, personnel, and information that lend their productions authenticity, while the armed forces get some measure of control over how they are depicted. That's important not just for recruiting, but also for guiding the behavior of current troops and appealing to the US taxpayers who foot the bills. National Cine Media, which sells ads in movie theaters, paired the Army and 20th Century Fox for a marketing campaign designed to reach potential recruits. The campaign intercut footage from the Fox superhero movie X-Men First Class with images of real soldiers as a voiceover intoned heroes, ordinary people who discover they can do extraordinary things. The spots played in cinemas, and exit polls of 17 to 24-year-olds leaving the movie theater found that those who saw the ad were 25% more likely to say they would consider joining the army. During Operation Fast and Furious, CBS News reports that officials wanted to use the suspicious sales of the weapons, encouraged by ATF against the judgment of some gun dealers, to influence gun legislation. In other words, the ATF was creating a problem and had a gun legislation solution lined up.